Mr. President,
Senator for Texas.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in a moment I'm going to propound a unanimous consent request. But before I do so, I want to make some brief remarks. As my colleagues know, and as several fact-checkers have confirmed over the past week, the Democrats' partisan reconciliation bill that became law last week will provide many illegal aliens with $1,400 rebate checks paid for by the American taxpayer. By several estimates, millions of illegal immigrants will get these rebates. I offered an amendment 2 weeks ago to the Democrats' bill to close this loophole. During debate on my amendment, one Democratic senator spoke against my amendment, saying that no illegal aliens have Social Security numbers, and therefore the premise of my amendment and my speech was, he said, quote, "not true." In fact, here are the senator's full remarks from the floor 2 weeks ago. Mr. President, the statement from the senator from Texas is just plain false. Let me be clear. Undocumented immigrants do not have Social Security numbers, and they do not qualify for stimulus relief checks, period. And just in case you didn't notice, they didn't qualify in December when 92 of us voted for that measure, and they don't qualify under the American Rescue Plan. Nothing has changed. And for you to stand up there and say the opposite is just to rile people up over something that's not true. It is not true. We know what's going on here. They want to be able to give speeches to say that the checks go to undocumented people in the circumstance where there is a parent, and at that point the senator's time expired. Following that debate, the senator in question took to Twitter to double down. So it was not, after an all night of no sleep, a moment of erroneous comment, but rather on Twitter, that same senator tweeted, quote, "Senator Cruz's claim is only meant to rile people up over something that is not true. You cannot receive a stimulus check without a Social Security number. That's a fact. Instead of discriminating against mixed status families, let's prioritize getting more relief to those families." A second tweet from the same senator. "We simply cannot stand by and allow outright falsehoods to be propagated on the Senate floor. It's time for GOP senators like Ted Cruz to stop trying to rile people up over misinformation." Well, as John Adams famously said, facts are stubborn things. And it turns out the comments from the Democratic senator were categorically false. And my comments that this bill would send checks to millions of illegal aliens were categorically true. Numerous fact-checkers began looking at the claims. Newsweek initially fact-checked it, and, as is the wont with a fair number of media fact-checkers, took the word of the Democrats for it and concluded my statement was mostly false. Following that, my staff got on the phone with Newsweek and presented them with uncontrovertible facts. Uncontrovertible facts that of the roughly 12 million estimated illegal aliens who are here, roughly 60% of them are visa overstays, people who came legally and then overstay their visa. And a significant percentage of visa overstays have Social Security numbers and will receive checks. Indeed, that is why my amendment was scored at saving the federal government over $600 million, because of the checks that would not go to illegal immigrants if my amendment had been passed. When Newsweek heard these facts, they did something really quite impressive, admirable. They admitted they were wrong. They revised their fact check, and they changed their fact check from mostly false to true. True, period. No caveats, true. I want to commend Newsweek for demonstrating journalistic integrity. Correcting that fact check, I'm sure, was not an easy decision for them to make, but it was the right decision for them to make. And so, Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that we enter this fact check into the record.
Without objection.
It is clear and indisputable that a significant number of illegal immigrants will receive checks and are receiving checks right now. All 100 members of this body were misinformed by the Democratic senator that no illegal aliens would receive fact checks, or would receive, rather, checks under stimulus checks. So I want to give my colleagues a chance to adopt the amendment now, with the correct information, with the true information, with the factual information. And I would note as well, in these deeply partisan times, it's easy for Republicans to throw insults at Democrats. It's easy for Democrats to throw insults at Republicans. Far too much of that occurs. The senator from Illinois, who is a friend who I've served with for 9 years, is a talented senator. I am not here suggesting that when he stood up and spoke on the Senate floor and said things that were absolutely false, that he did so knowingly and maliciously. I would certainly give the senator from Illinois the benefit of the doubt that he was in error rather than deliberately misstating facts. But the facts are now clear. We have a rule in this body, Rule 19, to reprimand any senator who impugns the character or integrity of another senator. I'm not going to seek refuge in that rule, although I think there's an argument that I could. But I will say this, that once the facts have been made clear, I hope my friend from Illinois will show the same principle Newsweek showed, to apologize, to say he was wrong and he's sorry for calling me a liar on the Senate floor and then going to Twitter to do so twice. That would be the right thing to do, to acknowledge an error when it occurred. Senator from Illinois' statement that no illegal immigrants will receive checks under this bill is categorically false. For that reason, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of S. 842, introduced earlier today. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, the exchange which took place between myself and the junior senator from Texas has been analyzed from many different directions. The conclusion of CNN, based on what he said on the floor and I responded to, is as follows. Cruz said, quote, every illegal alien in America, close quote, would get a $1,400 check. Durbin responded that Cruz's statement is, quote, just plain false, close quote, because he said, quote, undocumented immigrants do not have Social Security numbers and they do not qualify for stimulus relief checks, period, end of quote. According to CNN, they were both wrong. Cruz was inaccurate when he said every undocumented immigrant will get a $1,400 relief check, and then they go on to say there are people, a discrete class of people, who might have a Social Security number, be undocumented, and receive a check. And because of that clarification in my own investigation afterwards, I will concede their point. I overstated my case. And here's what it boils down to. In this situation, people have applied for a work visa, not a tourist or student visa, a work visa to come to the United States. And with that work visa, they also received a Social Security number. Then they overstayed their visas and still could possibly continue to be on the rolls with their Social Security number and receive a check. I might quickly add, this was a provision that was included in both of the relief bills for COVID-19 signed into law by President Trump, one of which the senator from Texas voted for, one of which he did not. And so I've asked, how many people are we talking about? 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000? I can't find out. They can't give me the number because there isn't a calculation. So here's the situation. You had to apply for a work visa, be granted the work visa and come to the United States, get a Social Security number, overstay your visa, and then continue to file income tax returns, because that's the only way you could qualify for help through these relief packages. I don't know if that group is 10 or 100 or 1,000, but I have carefully read the provisions that are offered by the senator from Texas today, and I'll tell you, he basically says to the American government, when it comes to cash payments, stop the presses. Stop the presses. I want to know who these people are, and I don't want you to send them a check. I don't believe that's reasonable. We've sent out 90 million checks, another 60 million on the way. To deny to these people the cash while we go through this element of debate and division is, I think, unfair. I don't want these checks to go to these people any more than he does, but I'm not going to stop the issuance of checks to people living in Texas or Illinois in the meantime. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
I would note several things. Number one, the senator from Illinois said he didn't know if the number of illegal immigrants getting checks from the Democrat stimulus bill was in the tens or the hundreds or the thousands. With all due respect, he does know that. It's not in the tens, it's not in the hundreds, it's not in the thousands. JCT, the Joint Committee on Taxation, which is a nonpartisan organization that reports to this Senate and this Congress, scored my amendment as roughly 482,000 illegal immigrants are getting checks under the Democrats' proposal. Two outside organizations have scored it as millions of illegal immigrants. And I would note what Newsweek said when they corrected their fact check, and I'm going to read a quote. The ruling: true. Cruz's claim that millions of illegal immigrants would receive stimulus payments is true, given that the amount of people who have overstayed their visas over the year. Once they overstay, they are technically considered illegal. Nowhere in the senator from Illinois' remarks was a word of apology for falsely calling me a liar on the floor of this Senate and on Twitter. That is unfortunate. What the senator from Illinois said right now is also incorrect. The senator from Illinois said this amendment would halt the payments that are going out. This amendment doesn't do anything of the sort. This amendment restricts sending payments to people who are here illegally. When the senator from Illinois said he would love to do that, with all due respect, that doesn't withstand even the slightest bit of scrutiny, because if he would love to do that, all he had to do was not object. And the American citizens, the people who are here legally, would all get their $1,400 checks, would get it on the exact same time frame, but those here illegally would not. Today's Democratic Party supports sending checks to millions of illegal immigrants. They have justified it, as the senator from Illinois did, by falsely claiming none of them are getting checks. Those are not the facts, as the Newsweek fact check makes clear. And I would note that a bill that Democratic senators are trying to push, denominated H.R. 1, what many are calling the Corrupt Politicians Act, would compound that by allowing millions of illegal immigrants to be registered to vote and no doubt to cast votes. This is a political decision that is far outside the mainstream. It is unfortunate, but sadly it reflects where today's Democratic Party is. I yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination.
Anybody know how the theme to Jurassic Park goes? Because that should be Ted Jurassic Cruz's theme. Something tells me that Ted Cruz needs to, well, maybe take a long vacation, because how long has he been a senator? Quite a while. And we actually spent a little bit of time looking back, and it would appear all Ted Cruz has achieved is sound bites, which are then picked up by cable news and gives him appearances on said aforementioned places like Fox News. Ted Cruz has carved himself out a career as being a little bit two-faced. He let Trump say what he liked about him, and as I said, rocks up to hearings, and we'll just put a few clips together. Give me your opinion on Ted Cruz. If Ted Cruz is your senator, are you pleased with what he's done personally for your life? No. Maybe that's a no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Every day, the disaster on our southern border continues to get worse. This disaster is a true humanitarian crisis, and it is the result of deliberate political decisions by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that have inflicted unspeakable horrors on millions of illegal immigrants. 6.6 million illegal immigrants have crossed illegally into this country since Joe Biden became president. And it is, in particular, done enormous damage to children. We're here today because the Biden administration has utterly failed. It has failed to secure the border, and it has encouraged parents to send their minor alien children on a dangerous trip to the United States unaccompanied. And it's failed to protect these children after they were let into the United States. The Democrats running this committee have also failed, as we're holding a hearing to discuss the issues facing HHS's placement of unaccompanied minors. But we don't even have a single official from HHS here to answer our questions. Javier Becerra should be sitting right in the middle of this panel, under oath, being forced to answer difficult questions about his absolute dereliction of duty when it comes to caring for these kids. But the Democrat leadership of this committee doesn't want Secretary Becerra to face those hard questions because it would reveal his utter negligence and the children who are being harmed as a result. And so the absence of HHS is not an accident. It's not an omission they just forgot. It's a deliberate decision. Let's protect the Biden administration from accountability. And concomitant with that decision is a decision to say the children being harmed are not important enough to the Democrat senators on this committee to overcome their partisan desire to play politics and protect the Biden administration from the consequences of their own failure. Take a look at this image. This image was captured from a video shot in El Paso on March 24th, 2023. Where a smuggler abandons a one-year-old child, a Guatemalan boy, on the riverbank. This one-year-old child has now entered the unaccompanied minor alien child system currently administered by the Biden Health and Human Services. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, approximately 127,000 unaccompanied minors entered the United States during fiscal year 2022. So 1 year, 127,000 kids, all alone. 2021, again, according to HHS, 107,686 unaccompanied minors entered the United States. Compare that to the last year of the Trump presidency, where that number was approximately 30,000. A 7-year low. Now, let me be clear, even one child in the custody of human traffickers is horrific and wrong. But 127,000? This administration, no wonder Secretary Becerra is too scared to sit there. He should be embarrassed of that record. Health and Human Services received $7.8 billion last year just for unaccompanied minor children. Troublingly, on February 24th, 2022, HHS admitted in a letter to Representative Andy Biggs that it could not contact approximately 20,000 minor children it placed in 2021. In 1 year, 20,000, it just lost them. No wonder Secretary Becerra is not sitting at that table. On March 22nd, 2023, Senator James Lankford pressed Secretary Becerra on a portion of the New York Times expose indicating that HHS had failed to account for 85,000 previously placed alien children. Becerra disputed the question, saying it was unrealistic, but he failed to offer any concrete evidence or data or statistics. On April 25th of this year, I joined Senator Marco Rubio and my colleagues in a letter addressing HHS failures on this score, which actively highlighted the fact that the Biden administration loosened vetting, fired HHS staffers who filed complaints, and ignored HHS contracted organizations who voiced concerns. After the New York Times published a second expose, the administration announced the Department of Labor was taking action. What action? Action addressing child labor. Well, child labor is abhorrent, but how about the hundreds of thousands of children who are being smuggled in by human traffickers, who are being abused, who are being sexually abused, who are being physically abused, and whom the Biden administration has lost? This is a humanitarian crisis, and it is a man-made crisis produced by political decisions from this White House. And every American, whether Democrat or Republican, should be horrified at the state of affairs.
Thank you to the witnesses, members of the public who are here today, members of the committee who have participated.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker.
Aye.
Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Welch.
Aye.
Ms. Butler. Mr. Graham.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No.
Mr. Cotton.
No, by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
Yes, by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 16, the nays are 5.
The nomination will be favorably recorded to the floor. Next is Adil Mangi, nominated to the Third Circuit. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on his nomination?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cruz, Senator Cruz, I'll take you first, and then Senator Lee and Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have deep concerns about this nominee, and I would note we have talked at length in this committee about the nature of Joe Biden's judicial nominees. He is consistently seeking people who are extreme, who are partisans, and who are out of the mainstream. Today, we are voting on several judges whose records, quite frankly, are extraordinary. And it is consistently disappointing that no matter what a judge has done, a judicial nominee has done, no matter how extreme their record, the Democrats on this committee will vote in favor of those nominees. Mr. Mangi served for years on the Board of Advisors of a radical and anti-Semitic law center at Rutgers. It was called the Center for Security, Race, and Rights. That center hosted an event on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, challenging the, quote, narrative regarding that gruesome terror attack. The existing narrative concerning 9/11, to the extent that there is one, is that vicious terrorists launched a cowardly attack and killed thousands of American civilians. Call me crazy, I don't think that's a narrative that needs to be rethought. It's pretty accurate in terms of what happened, but apparently the center did not think so. The panel of speakers at the event included, firstly, an actual terrorist. I'm not joking. Sami al-Aryan, who in 2006 was convicted of conspiracy to contribute services or benefits to a terrorist organization, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, spoke on this 9/11 panel. The panel also featured Hatem Bazian, who explicitly called for intifada in the United States. That's not rumor or innuendo. It's on video, and it's undisputed. Is that a mainstream position? Apparently, Senate Democrats think it is. To have another October 7th here in the United States. Are my Democratic colleagues okay with this? Or do they simply believe the press will not report anything, no matter how extreme these nominees are, so they can be safe? This event also featured Professor Rabab Abdul Hadi, who had hosted her own events in San Francisco, ones that platformed and featured an actual terrorist and plane hijacker, Leila Khaled. Mr. Mangi, who was on the advisory board of this center, while all of this was transpiring. Now, if this were just a single isolated event, maybe it would be a different story. But instead, the opposite is true. This sort of radical political programming was at the very core of this organization Mr. Mangi was involved in. In May of 2021, the center held an event called, quote, the 100 Years War on Palestine Teach-In, a Jewish news syndicate opinion piece entitled, quote, Hamas apologists slander Israel at Rutgers Teach-In, described the event as, quote, terrorist whitewashing webinar. Among other things, speakers at the event explained that, quote, Israel has succeeded in painting Palestinian resistance as terror. Understand the Democrat senators on this committee are perfectly fine with that. They don't have a problem with that at all because they're getting ready to vote for a judge who served on the advisory board and saw event after event after event and didn't see anything he disagreed with because he kept serving there. On September 2022, the center held another event entitled, quote, Consistent Partiality, U.S. Foreign Policy on Palestine, Israel. One of the speakers, Peter Beinart, stated, quote, there's a deep identification among many conservative white American Christians with Israel, and it partly comes from the fact that Israel, like the United States, is a settler colonial state. The Democrats on this committee agree with that? Apparently, they're willing to vote for judges that do. On May 29th, 2021, the director of the center, Professor Sahar Aziz, signed a letter which was posted on the center's website, which read, quote, a ceasefire does not end the colonial conditions of structural violence and inequality that Palestinians live under. The letter went on, quote, the Palestinian rights to freedom, security in their homes, to return, self-determination, and to be free of violent occupation are well established under international law. The language of both-sidedness, of timeless or religious conflict with moments of escalation erases the military, economic, media, and diplomatic power that Israel, an occupying force, has over Palestine. The most shocking part of this statement reads, quote, we are in awe of the Palestinian struggle to resist violent occupation, removal, and erasure, and the expansion of Israeli settler colonialism. Well, after October 7th, are Senate Democrats in awe of that? We'll find out with their vote in a moment. I asked Mr. Angie, did he agree with these statements? Specifically, did he agree or disagree with Professor Aziz? And I have to say his answer was reminiscent of Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes. I know nothing. Who's she again? I asked him, did he agree with Professor Aziz's statement, whether Israel was an occupying force in Palestine? And he refused to answer. He said, it was too complex. Let that sink in for a minute. I have to say, I kind of wondered if he was auditioning to be president of Harvard. He just needs context to know whether the Hamas terrorist or the IDF are more problematic. He had the opportunity to denounce this event, to denounce these statements, to denounce this center, and he didn't do it. He just said, no, I don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about it. No, too complex. So I have no idea. I have no views at all. He also tried to give this committee the impression that his connection with the senator was extremely limited. What senator? No, I was just on an advisory board. I have no idea what they're doing. Mind you, look, it's possible, I don't know, but it's possible he didn't know about this event celebrating terrorists on 9/11. It's possible he didn't know about the event before it happened. But you know what he didn't do? He didn't resign after it happened. He didn't say, whoa, I didn't know this is what you guys were doing. Nope, he was perfectly fine. And by the way, they kept on doing these events over and over and over again. But he wasn't just on the advisory board. He was a donor. He gave $6,500 of his own money, wrote it to the center. But that's not it. He didn't just give his own money. He also went to his law firm, Patterson Belknap, to help get the center an additional $13,000. So nearly 20 grand. And mind you, what Mr. Mangy wants to tell this committee is, yeah, I helped raise nearly 20 grand. I gave $6,500 myself. I was on the advisory board, but you can't blame me for anything. And mind you, he could have done what some of Biden's nominees do, which is take their record and run away from it, denounce it, say I was mistaken, I was young. No, he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just said it's too complex, he can't give an opinion. He didn't denounce any of this. And by the way, who recruited Mr. Mangy to the center? That would be the director, Sahar Aziz, the same woman who described Israel as an occupying force, quote unquote, that engages in, quote, settler colonialism. The Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey has stated that Aziz, quote, regularly and consistently promoted vile anti-Semitic propaganda. The Senate Democrats agree with that, quote, vile anti-Semitic propaganda. Well, we're going to find out, and there's no surprise. Senate Democrats of the Russian Politburo, that's how you vote, no matter how extreme the nominee. I understand when your party's in power, it's expected that you vote for most of your president's judicial nominees. Many of us on the committee were here all 4 years Donald Trump was president. We had a number of nominees. I voted for most of those nominees. I understand that. I'm not expecting Democrats to suddenly start voting against a ton of Democrat nominees. But Joe Biden and this White House are seeking out radicals. And repeatedly, when President Trump made nominees who we deemed outside the mainstream, we said, no, that's not going to cut it. And we actually exercised advise and consent, the constitutional authority of the Senate. I do not understand why Senate Democrats believe they have no responsibility and why they're willing to rubber stamp these nominees, but I would urge every member of this committee to vote against this nomination.
Before recognizing another senator from the Republican side, I'd like to make a statement. It's been my honor to be on this committee for more than 2 decades. This is one of the best committees on Capitol Hill in terms of the opportunity to address issues of the moment and to make a difference in the selection of lifetime appointments for judicial nominations that will impact this country for years forward. I've sat through hundreds and hundreds of these nominations. Under President Biden, it's been close to 200 already. And in the past, like numbers in previous years. I will tell you what happened in this committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, on December the 13th, 2023, to this nominee is a new low in this committee, a new low. What is it about Adil Mangi that attracts such criticism? We know what the starting point is. He would be the first Muslim American to be appointed to serve on the circuit bench. That's an amazing honor. There are only 3 other Muslim American federal judges, and he would have the highest rank among them. And we know because of that he is a target for things that he's done in the past. But like every other nominee, he has to let his life work speak for itself and answer the questions of this committee. So what is this man, and why should we be concerned? You've just heard a presentation, a suggestion that because of his background, he is likely to be either anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he's a Muslim American. Anti-Semitic or a terrorist. He said things over and over again during the course of the hearing where he could not have possibly been twisted to say that he is anti-Semitic. But don't take my word for it, a partisan supporter of President Biden's nominee. Think of one Jewish organization in America that you might turn to ask, what do you think? Is this man's background or statements anti-Semitic? I think it might be the Anti-Defamation League. ADL. We all know them. They've been around a long, long time. Let me read the letter that they wrote to this committee and every member after the questioning, which you've just heard, and similar questions from other Republican nominees. As the leading anti-hate organization in the world, whose mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and treatment for all, ADL is compelled to speak out about the inappropriate and prejudicial treatment of Adil Abdul Mangi, a nominee for U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, during the Judiciary Committee hearing on December 13, 2023. During his confirmation hearing, Mr. Mangi was subjected to aggressive questioning unrelated to his professional expertise or qualifications. Rather, he was forced to provide responses to a wide range of inquiries regarding his views on global strategic considerations in a manner that inappropriately politicized these issues and raised serious questions about pretext and bias. The ADL goes on to report as follows. Just as associating Jewish Americans with certain views or beliefs regarding Israeli government actions would be deemed anti-Semitic, berating the first American Muslim federal appellate judicial nominee with endless questions that appear to have been motivated by bias toward his religions is profoundly wrong. Hate, bias, and bigotry have no place in government, especially in the hallowed halls of Congress. When nominees approach a congressional hearing, their religion, heritage, race, gender, or any other protected identity characteristic should not be the subject for political fodder. This was an attempt to create controversy where it does not exist, the ADL writes. ADL urges leaders to refrain from fueling discrimination and hate and urges the Senate to offer Mr. Mangi a fair vote based on his qualifications and fitness. That wasn't the only Jewish organization. Scores of Jewish organizations have written to us complaining about the way he was treated and supporting his nominations. And here's what the American Jewish Committee said. Mr. Mangi, who would be the first American Muslim to serve in this role, affirmed his belief in Israel's right to exist, his abhorrence of terrorism and any justifications for it, and outright rejection of anti-Semitism from the American Jewish Committee. Let me also report, if I can, that at the end of his questioning by Senator Cruz, I asked Mr. Mangi if he would want to give a complete answer. Here is what he said about the incident involved, the event that has been highlighted over and over again. I'll answer your question very directly, Senator Cruz. I will condemn without equivocation any terrorism, any terrorist, or any act of terrorism, or any defense of any act of terrorism. And this event, I don't know this event, Mr. Mangi said. I don't know anything about this event or who these people are. I've never heard of them. If someone on there is a terrorist, I condemn them. He said that under oath unequivocally. Did you hear that in response by Senator Cruz? You did not, I'm sure. And so it comes down to the bottom line. Do we have the courage to stand up and say this was wrong, the way this man's been treated? Do we have the courage to say that assuming that everyone of a Muslim faith in America is a suspect terrorist or anti-Semitic? I hope we do. Senator Lee?
Mr. Chairman, I deserve a right to respond to that.
Well, you'll decide that, but I'll decide Senator
Well,
Lee's
you've
right
impugned
first.
my character, and you made an accusation
I read
that
an
was a
ADL
vicious
letter.
lie. I'm going to quote from you what you said about me. You said that I had just asked a question, and here is a quote from you, Mr. Chairman, quote, that I'd said he is likely to be anti-Semitic or a terrorist because he is Muslim. Now, you have just impugned my character by making a false accusation, and I will say it is disgraceful. Did you respond to any of the substance of what I said? No. You just attacked me and called me a bigot, and you responded by stating deliberate falsehoods. You said he would be the first Muslim. Well, you know what? I understand. Excuse me. I have a right to defend myself when you impugn my character in a way that is a new low for this committee. You did not dispute any of the facts I said about the organization, that he was an advisor of, he was a donor of, he raised money for. Instead, you said he'd be the first Muslim on the federal court. Well, no, that actually is not correct. And in fact, Mr. Chairman, in fact, judge. So the Democrats don't want to defend the substance, so now they're screaming Islamophobia. And I understand playing the race card when anyone disagrees with the Democrats, they scream racist. I stand by the ADL letter. But Senator Lee, I'm going to defend myself because under the Senate rules, you have impugned my character in a way that is blatantly false. And let's just respond with facts, with substance, rather than invective. Just recently, Zahid Qureshi was nominated by President Biden, was confirmed by the Senate. Like Mangi, Qureshi is a Pakistani American. He's a Muslim. And he was nominated to serve the people of New Jersey. However, unlike Mangi, he doesn't have association with a radical anti-Semitic group. He doesn't have association with whitewashing terrorism. Rather, Qureshi served in the Army. He was deployed twice to Iraq. He worked for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and he served as a federal prosecutor. And he received 83 votes in the United States Senate for confirmation, the second most under Joe Biden, second only to a nominee from Texas, whom John Cornyn and I recommended. And so it is not the fact that Mr. Mangi is a Muslim that is his problem. It is the fact that his record is extreme. And by the way, if you want to look to Jewish organizations, the Zionist Organization of America has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. The Coalition for Jewish Values has submitted a letter to this committee opposing the nomination. Stop Anti-Semitism, a nonpartisan organization, has voiced their concerns with Mr. Mangi's affiliation. I want to introduce into the record, I ask unanimous consent to introduce into a record an article from the New York Post entitled "Biden Judicial Nominee Draws Scrutiny Over Ties to Controversial 9/11 Memorial Event." I responded with substance and fact, and you responded with insults and invective that ignored the substance that Mr. Mangi deliberately associated with a consistently anti-Semitic organization, and yet Democrats are perfectly happy for him to be a federal judge.
I stand by the statement that I read into the record from ADL, and I also stand by
the quote from you was not from ADL.
I stand by the record that I read it into the record, the statement from ADL, and I also stand by what was said under oath by Mr. Mangi after you finished trying to associate him with this organization, that he had no connection with it.
Did you just say he had no connection with this organization? Is that seriously what you said in this hearing? He was on the board of advisors, he was a donor and raised money for him, and you just said he has no connection with him?
See, you twist this situation.
Mr. Chairman, you just said he has no connection with this organization. Is that your view and the view of Senate Democrats?
Read his statement to you.
Is that your view, that he had no connection with this organization?
Senator Lee.
Okay, you're refusing to answer because it's obviously indefensible and false.
Senator Lee.
Mr. Mangi.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Mustafa Kujubai, nominated to the District of Oregon. Does anyone seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I've spoken about this nominee in the past, and there's a pattern when Democrats have problematic nominees, ones that would be embarrassing if their support for those nominees were widely publicized. They do what they're doing today, which is they flood the zone with nominees and they pack the objectionable ones in the middle, hoping no one notices. Well, Mustafa Kujubai is a particularly extreme nominee. President Biden has nominated his fair share of wild leftists, but it's not often that one has such a clear track record of, among other things, advocating for Marxist outcomes. Judge Kujubai has previously advocated for, quote, the integration of Marxist theory into the American economic system, and he has argued for a creative struggle to, quote, redefine property. He's not even bothering to hide his radicalism. And by the way, my colleague Senator Booker accused Republicans of McCarthyism, even if he wasn't sure if it was Eugene, Joe, or Kevin. But I would note that when I said Democrats are behaving as the Russian Politburo, I was not calling you communists. I was instead pointing to action. What did the Politburo do? It behaved like docile sheep doing whatever dear leader required. Your behaviors can refute the Politburo by having one Democrat vote no on one nominee, but none of you will. You all will do. You behave like the Politburo, which is why I said you behave like the Politburo. And here you have an instance to do so, to decide whether or not you want to vote for a nominee who has advocated for Marxism. Now, that's your choice. But if you always follow the orders of the White House, no matter how extreme the nominee is, then you shouldn't be surprised when you're compared to the Politburo, because that's what the Politburo did. I will also point out that Judge Katsubai has required litigants who come before him to refer to one another by their preferred pronouns and pressured party to include their gender pronouns on their signature block. Now, I've litigated cases in front of a lot of judges. I've never seen a judge do this anywhere in the country, and it gives you a sense of just how extreme and radical this is. He's going to impose his ideology on you. If you're a litigant, you will knuckle under to this extreme ideology. He also proclaimed that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is the heart and soul of the court system. In fact, he went on to say, can we say that? Yeah, I just did, and I'm saying it proudly. Senator Booker, who is my friend, who I work with quite a bit, said that all of the Democrats are horrified by what's happening on college campuses. I wish that were a true statement. But I don't see Democrats speaking up, taking on the anti-Semitism at college campuses, taking on the DEI that is resulting in Jewish students feeling persecuted because radicals treat Jews as oppressors and treat Hamas terrorists as victims. I certainly don't want federal judges making decisions on the basis of race or vague expressions of leftist ideology. There's a reason that Lady Justice is blind, because a judge is not supposed to show prejudice or preference one way or the other for any race, for any religion. A judge is supposed to follow the law. And finally, what was particularly concerning was Judge Katsubai's actions during the violent riots we saw all across the country in 2020. When Portland, Oregon suffered months of violence at the hands of Antifa rioters, specifically singling out the Marco Hatfield federal courthouse for attack, for 60 days, 6-0, radicals laid siege to a federal courthouse, attempting to set it on fire, throwing Molotov cocktails, fighting federal officers, injuring law enforcement officers day after day after day, even using lasers to permanently damage the eyes of some of the officers. Well, the city of Eugene saw what was happening in Portland and tried to prevent that from happening in Eugene, Oregon. But Eugene is where Judge Katsubai presided. The city of Eugene sought to enforce a curfew to prevent similar violence in Eugene. And what did Judge Katsubai do? He blocked it. Not only did he block it, he retaliated against the city manager that enacted the curfew and the police chief that enforced the curfew. He denied them qualified immunity, in essence throwing them to the wolves to be sued for trying to protect the citizens of Eugene, Oregon, and keep them safe. If you want to know whether a federal judge is going to stand with violent mobs or the citizens, you can look to this case and decide. And if you want to know whether the Senate Democrats are going to stand with the violent mobs of the citizens, you can look to their vote in just a moment and see as well. And again, that is not by association, my friend.
That is your actions. When you say the word I over and over and over again, no matter the record, your actions are defining what you're doing. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, he invoked my name. I hate to slow things up, but he did not, to the record, he clarified that he's not calling us communists. He's calling all Democrats docile sheep. This from a guy who's afraid to face me in basketball since we've gotten here. I will quote to you simply from one of my toxic masculinity heroes, Mark Wayne Mullen. I quote, "Anytime, any place, cowboy."
The quote from that same senator, now's the time, now's the place. There's Bernie asking us to settle down.
Sorry, we have a flood of nominees. Next is Mustafa Kazuai, nominated District of Oregon. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Ms. Corona. Aye. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
Aye.
Mr. Welch. Butler. Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11 and the nays are 10.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Edward Keel, nominated to the District of New Jersey. Anyone seek recognition? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Corona. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla.
Aye.
Mr. Ossoff.
You sure you want
Mr.
that?
Welch. Ms.
Sure you want
Butler.
that chair?
Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Grassley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cruz.
No.
Mr. Hawley.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cotton.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Tillis.
No by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn.
No by proxy.
Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, on this vote, the ayes are 11, the nays are 10.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Yumi Lee to the Northern District